Great. Well, welcome everybody to the series of conversations on single-use plastic. This month's conversation is on synthetic playing surfaces. And we will be talking about and answering all kinds of questions, including the question,
A sister
why
has
does
lost her
the
brother who
CDC
was trying to
recommend that we our children to these playing surfaces, that we go and right away wash our hands, wash our bodies, wash our clothes, and they even go further than that to tell you that you should turn your clothes inside out, put down a towel on your car where your shoes go, so that you don't track any contamination into your car and then leave your shoes outside. But we have with us today Dr. Kathleen Michels, who's a neuroscientist for the global public health profession and a mother of 2 grown sons. And she resides in Silver Springs, Maryland, but she grew up in New York State. She's retired from the National Institute of Health Fogarty International Center. And she advocates for the protection and restoration of natural ecosystems and for safe, healthy, non-toxic environment for all and green infrastructure, integrating nature into the built environment. She advocates for access to real vegetative spaces and recreation and the safe and healthy housing for all. She definitely addresses greenwashing and several other things, and is one of the co-founders of Safe and Healthy Playing Fields. So Kathleen is going to start off trying to get us on the same page with a PowerPoint. You can start putting your questions in the chat, and we will welcome any questions, comments, concerns you have regarding synthetic playing surfaces. And we want this to be a real conversation to help get an understanding of why synthetic playing surfaces are a very big issue for the health and well-being of our children and our environment. So Kathleen, you can take it away and share the screen.
I have to unmute. Okay. And I apologize. I created this in Google Docs and I'm presenting it in PowerPoint, which I probably shouldn't have done. So it's a little funky, but hopefully everything will come through great. So thank you, Tamala, and I'm happy to be presenting with Kelly as well. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
And if in the middle of your screen on the top, it'll say slideshow, and then you can click to
do you know how I get rid of, there's this,
yeah, so if you go to the middle of your screen, you'll see where it says animation slideshow.
the problem is there's this black bar at the top of my screen with all the controls on it. How do I get that?
Okay. Yeah, take it and drag it down to the bottom of your screen.
Aha.
There you go. I know, it's such a pain.
But then can't I like get it to go away?
If you shove it to the top, it should kind of go away.
Okay. All right. Well, let me start it's just kind of in my way, but as long as you all can't see it, that's fine. Yeah, let me do start from the beginning. Okay, there it goes. So thank you again for coming. Again, I'm with Safe Healthy Playing Fields, and Safe Healthy Playing Fields is an affiliate of Beyond Plastics, which is a wonderful advocacy organization and support for people working on all aspects of plastic pollution. So I want to give a shout out to them and really encourage everyone to get involved in their meetings. And there's a course that Judith Enck, who is the president of Beyond Plastics, gives. But anyway, a shout out to them and to Safe Healthy Playing Fields. I'm a board member. Diana Conway is the president, and we're a nonprofit. So tonight, sports fields, grass or plastic, when I was growing up, there wasn't an option, but in the past 15 years or so, it's not going. Oh, there we go. Okay. In the past 15 years or so, there's been a option that is turning out to be not all it's cracked up to be. And as many of you know, plastics in general we're starting to realize are a real problem in the environment, both for health and just environmental health of all living beings, not just humans. So in this slide, I just showed Lee Kelly will talk later about the playground surfacing. So just to kind of orient you, because it does get a little confusing, synthetic turf fields are plastic carpets. And as you can see over on the right-hand side here, there's basically they're basically plastic shag carpets that are tufted into a backing, and then they're laid out on the fields. And then and often pulverized tires are dumped on top of them to soften them, because they're a carpet laid out on rocks. So they're literally get hard as rock, hard as concrete. It's like falling on rocks if you don't put something on top. So a couple of inches of pulverized tires, which is a problem because tires are microplastics. So tires are plastics, and they release microplastics that are full of all of the chemicals and heavy metals and volatile organics that are put in tires to make them roll well on the road and to last, but they're not meant for life. In fact, almost everything in tires is bad for life. And so I won't say too much about the playgrounds because, but those are rubber. So the synthetic turf fields don't have to have the rubber on them. There are alternative infills that I'll mention later, but the playgrounds are now being surfaced with tire waste, and which may have sounded good at the time. I know originally I thought, oh, great, rubber, right? It's bouncy. Well, not so fast. So let's go back to the synthetic turf fields. So you're promised this green, well-playing, long-lasting, low-maintenance field. Well, so the top picture here is kind of, a new field, all bright and green, and it doesn't show you how hot it gets, and it doesn't show you the other problems. This field on the left down below, that's only a few years old at this time when this picture was taken. And you can see all that green stuff, that's not grass, that's all the plastic breaking down, and all the black is the tire crumb. And in this middle one, you can see the tire crumb washing off, and as the balls bounce, you can see the tire crumb going up. A lot of you've probably seen that at NFL games on TV. But just think in terms of whenever a child or an athlete steps on a field, runs around on a field, they are surrounded by a cloud, essentially, an invisible, partly visible like here, but mostly invisible cloud of particulates. And you want those particulates to be natural and not synthetic. So let's just go over, there's 5 basic areas that are problematic when we're talking about plastic carpeting as a sports field. Heat, they get hotter than asphalt, and it's not just the tire crumb, it's the plastic as well. Injury, all the divots that you see in a grass field, That's protecting ankles and knees. You know, the grass is giving way instead of the athlete's joints. But with the synthetic turf field, when they plant their feet and they turn, their foot gets stuck there. So the synthetic turf doesn't give way. And in addition, as I mentioned, the field is laid out on a base of rocks. More recently, they put what they call a shock pad, but that causes more problems because then there's the drainage that interferes with the drainage. But most of the time it's just a carpet laid out on rocks. So it over time, as all this pulverized tires starts to wash off of it, they get hard as concrete. And the athletes, the children playing on it, are also subject to concussions and breaks. The other issue is toxicity. So tires are, I'll mention later some of the toxic materials in tires. I won't go through that all now. And in the plastics. And you've probably heard about the PFAS chemicals, and I'll mention those. Cost, no matter what anyone tells you in your school district or your municipality, synthetic turf is way more expensive up front. It's not that different to maintain cost-wise. And then you have to replace it, and you don't have to replace grass. Or if you do, it's like just a tiny fraction of what it costs to maintain synthetic turf, because grass grows. And if you install it correctly, and we'll talk about, this later, if you do the right things by grass, just like any living thing, if you give it a good foundation, it will give back to you. If you treat it poorly from the start, it will struggle. And so it's the same with grass. But at the end of the day, it's much less expensive grass over initially and disposal grass, you don't need to dispose of it. It composts. But synthetic turf is literally hundreds of tons of plastic. It sheds up to a ton of macro and microplastics per year per field. And then at the end of its, relatively short life, 8 to 10 years, it needs to be dumped. And there's no good places to dump it, except for landfills, and they take up a lot of room in landfills. So they're being piled up many places and causing lots of problems. So just, quickly, just the nutshell version. So what's the solution? The solution is better grass fields. And but people are asking, well, do you have somebody I can talk to? Well, it's the grass professionals. It's not really an industry. There's a lot of individuals, but there is a Sports Field Managers Association, SFMA, and local experts. So you do have to seek them out sometimes because of the plastic, a lot of the knowledge has kind of gone away. And in the localities. So you have to kind of sometimes seek it out if your districts aren't already doing that. And of course, organic maintenance of grass fields is the key thing that everybody is aiming for now. So the solution again is real grass for real kids. The climate is changing. This was a Sports Illustrated story recently, and we talked about climate and football and the fact that with hotter temperatures, football deaths are skyrocketing. There's more football deaths than in all of the other sports due to heat exertion. And the statistics show that Black high school players are disproportionately affected. And they actually discuss what is the impact of this hotter than asphalt artificial turf. Again, here's some pictures just to show you. These are infrared camera photos. So the hotter a surface is, the brighter red it'll be. So it goes from blue is the coolest, red is the hottest. So on the top left here, you see a grass field, which is a nice cool blue. And on the right, a synthetic turf field, which is, bright red. And the bottom, you kind of get you see some of the rooftops, and you could see that the synthetic turf field is as hot as the rooftops. And So grass is always going to be about the same as air temperature, you know, give or take, depending on the humidity conditions. But synthetic turf is always going to be hotter, not just than grass, but hotter than asphalt. I mean, you can see the asphalt on the roads. It's hotter in this uh, infrared camera aerial photo. It's even hotter than the roadways. So you know why your kid's playing on that. So synthetic turf, this is another way of taking, so you all can do this. You can get these handheld infrared, we call them guns, but they're very cheap. And even the cheapest ones seem to work just as well as the more expensive ones. So here on the left, you have a rubber playground. So this is a hot day. It's about, I guess, it was 100 degrees. So it's a hot day. So grass is about the same on the right-hand side as the air temperature. Asphalt, really hot this day. Now, sometimes the asphalt is not quite up as hot as the rubber and the plastic. So the plastic synthetic turf is up at, a little hotter than asphalt, and the rubber playgrounds are even hotter than that. So these are two ways of doing heat. So now we're going to go to, I mentioned earlier, the injuries, and this is getting a lot of play in the National Football League because a lot of the players are sustaining anterior cruciate ligament tears in their, and you don't want a highly paid player out for the season. So, and they of course don't want to be out. So it's causing problems. And the knees, the ankles, and NCAA. So it's not just the National Football League, but the NCAA, the college football athletes, also have much higher rates. And we experienced this at the University of Maryland. They put in a synthetic turf field, and they immediately lost their three best players to tears. And when they first install it, it's even softer, which seems nice, but it also means your foot grabs into it and doesn't move. So, and then it gets harder later, and then you hit your head on it. So, you can't win. So hard surfaces always generate more injuries, and plastic fields, especially over the years, the tire crumb goes away, and it gets compacted, and basically you have a rug on rocks that they're falling on. And so there's a number of studies on this. I won't go through them, but one really important thing to remember, because they say, oh, these are low or no maintenance. That's not true. It's like, if you don't do the maintenance on them, that's when you have the real safety problems, because I'll show you later, the tire crumb that's supposed to be protecting them just leaves the field, or whatever the infill is. There's even the alternative infills. So there's a lot of maintenance required. Also, to sanitize it. As you can imagine, anything that falls in that field basically stays on the field. It's not like grass and soil that break down sweat and blood and, bird droppings and, feces, all that stuff. It just stays there. So there's a lot of work actually to sanitize it, to redistribute the infill, and just to make sure it's safe. These are some of the injuries. So there's way more abrasion injuries, and this has been done since the beginning, and I'll go through quickly because these are kind of gross, but this is the kind of things that happen. And you can see the tire crumb, getting into these open wounds with the toxic load that tires have in them is, opens up the athlete to even more potential toxic risk. So what are the problems? The blades in the, with pollution and toxicity, the blades in the infill begin to migrate off site immediately upon installation. So a field can lose a ton or more of the plastic blades and the infill. The plastic debris goes everywhere, comes home with the kids and the athletes, contaminates the soil, water, and air. And then the most recent problem that we became aware of, and it's kind of like a Pandora's box, something new keeps cropping up, is that what made these huge synthetic turf, synthetic plastic carpets possible was the addition of the forever chemicals, the perfluorinated chemicals that enable the plastic blades not to stick to the extrusion machinery when they're making the carpets. So these PFAS chemicals can contaminate the air, soil, and water around, leach out, and of course the athletes who are playing on them. And so here's some of the toxics that are in the plastic turf. There's phthalates, so plasticizers, which are endocrine disruptors, antioxidants, which also have a variety of physiological effects and are carcinogens. Heavy metals in pigments like lead and cadmium, and as I mentioned, the PFAS chemicals. And these are, we don't know what else is in there because most of what they put in is proprietary. So they don't always tell you what they're putting in there. The tire crumb is like the worst of the worst. And so a lot of places are banning tire crumb without banning the plastic synthetic carpets. But they're full of carbon black, which is particulate that you breathe in. Lead is often found in hot spots in tire crumb because it picks up the lead from the roadways. It's full of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are highly carcinogenic. Again, phthalates, volatile organic compounds. So there's actually hundreds of compounds in tire crumb, many of which are known to be either carcinogenic or immune disruptive or hormone endocrine disruptive. And then there's aquatic toxins such as zinc, which isn't that bad for humans, but it's really bad for aquatic organisms. And that's at present at high levels. And then the recently identified antioxidant 6-ppd quinone that's added to all tires and kills 100% of the migrating coho salmon in the Northwest. And you can imagine they're the canary in the coal mines. What else is it doing to all of us, especially considering that tire wear particles are now known to be the #1 microplastic pollutant in the world. So just again on PFAS, all synthetic turf grass samples have tested positive for the perfluorinated forever chemicals. And the Synthetic Turf Council and some of the manufacturers have testified that they cannot manufacture the grass without PFAS, and yet they're trying to claim that they are. But what they're doing is the whack-a-mole, because PFAS is a class of chemicals, and if they change to another chemical, they go, oh, now we've changed. Well, no, it's just another class of PFAS chemicals. And a recent Swedish study found up to 38 pounds of PFAS per field. And if you've been following the PFAS story, the levels that are considered, there is no safe level of PFAS, but the levels that they're putting for regulation are down at the parts per trillion, even parts per quadrillion. So like a drop in several Olympic-sized swimming pools. So this is a lot of PFAS, even if it's not all getting out right away. But certainly its manufacture, it's polluting wherever it comes from, which is something I haven't even brought up. So it pollutes all through its life from beginning to the end. And new evidence shows PFAS in water that there wasn't PFAS in the water before it was there. So there's some more pictures just showing, how this stuff breaks down. It washes off into your storm drains and of course comes in contact with the athletes. 1 to 5 tons per year. And again, this is what happens when you don't maintain them. So if anyone tries to tell you that these are no or low maintenance, this is what happens when you don't maintain them. The previous slide and this one, and they get hard, which you can't see, but the athletes can. Recent studies have shown, that about 15% of the plastics in rivers and oceans are from plastic synthetic turf. A Chinese study showed 10%, so they're consistent. A recent Toronto study showed that a study out of Canada showed that microplastics were that synthetic turf was the #1 source of microplastics in the urban environment. Although as total plastics, plastic litter was the most, but the microplastics.
Apparently, these fields are the #1 source of PFAS in urban areas, 15% in general.
Is somebody else? I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely.
So each infill comes with its own problems, and there's a number of different kinds of infills: cork, nutshell, pine rice. But I won't go through these, but this is what happens with some of the alternative infills. So if you try to go which quote unquote organic infills, this is rice husk, pine, they wash off even easier. You have to, so much for no watering. Not only do you have to water the fields to keep them cool, but if you don't water these organic infills, they have to stay hydrated, or they float away, or they blow away. And as you can see, they also float away. And here's some more. This is a different kind of organic infill. And on the right-hand side, again, you can see the grass blades just breaking down and washing off onto the track, and then that will go down to your storm drains. Equity. So I never understood this equity claim, except they try to claim that the fields are able to be used more, but grass fields can actually, do them right, and you can use them more and spend the same amount of money on, several grass fields as you do on one synthetic field, and everybody can play. And synthetic turf always creates a heat island, and that's just what kids need, right? In cities, or human beings in general, is more heat islands. So it's certainly not equitable to be frying kids outside in anywhere. The toxic load, I mean, kids are already being exposed to all sorts of toxic substances in the air, soil, and water, and certainly in cities even more so. So the last thing you want to do is expose them to more toxins in these synthetic surfaces. And why is that equitable? So think about it. And children, of course, are uniquely susceptible to the health effects of environmental hazards because they're low to the ground. They eat, drink, and breathe more per body weight. They're rapidly developing, and so these hazards. So it's the opposite. It turn the equity upside down. Putting these in their communities are harming them disproportionately. So just grass, the International Governing Body for Professional Soccer requires all tournaments to be on natural grass, and they just handed the Soccer World Cup to the US, and they're going to have to. Many of them are synthetic turf. Many of the stadiums that are going to be involved, and they're going to have figure out how to go to grass in order to accommodate the World Cup. European soccer, again, the players' contracts specifically exclude play on artificial turf. And this is what the NFL is starting to try to do in the US too. And Major League Baseball, I think it may be even less now. And baseball, the game of summer went away from synthetic turf pretty early because literally their shoes would melt. The bottoms of their shoes would melt out there on the field because they're standing there.
This is Tamala. Are you just about done? We want to
So I'm
make
just
sure
about done. So grass, so a well-maintained grass field is the answer. Synthetic turf needs replacement every 8 to 10 years. Grass does not. And again, there's this huge cost, replacement cost every 8 to 10 years for synthetic turf, in addition to the huge upfront costs. And if you want to, I can send these out, but this is a cost summary put together from a variety of sources. But again, the initial costs, I mean, grass comes out ahead no matter what you do. And just they'll always talk about maintenance, but you notice here the average maintenance actually isn't all that different unless you don't do any maintenance on the synthetic turf, and then it becomes unplayable. And no recycling. So the synthetic turf industry itself has said, when asked point blank how many fields have actually been recycled, and they point blank said the answer is none. That was the actual phrase. So here's some of the dumping sites, you know, this is just the tip of the turf berg, waste with harmful chemicals dumped anywhere and everywhere. And unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not, quoting the Lorax. So thank you. And we can go over some of the things that you can do later.
Wow, Kathleen, that was incredibly informative and very succinct, hitting all the bases there. I have some questions. We're going to postpone the Q&A. Since we're running just a little bit behind, I would like for you guys to meet a grassroots organizer from New York. She will be addressing the port in place. There's a lot of different type of synthetic playing surfaces. Artificial turf and the port in place are the most common, but there's tiles and tire crumb and several others. But we'll be welcoming you guys to also stay after for a little bit if you want to ask questions, and then if you can put your questions in the chat, and if we don't get around to them, we'll answer them offline and get them to you in the follow-up. And we'll also share out if the guests or experts are okay with it, the PowerPoint presentations or their presentations as well. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Lee Kelly. She is a mom and a freelance creative director who enjoys crossword puzzles, but has been dealing with the PIP or poured in place surfaces in her local community. And she also started an organization called CARE, where she restored photos for Sandy. So without further ado, I am going to say, take it away, Lee.
All right, and I see myself on small screen here. I do come to this from the perspective of a concerned parent, not a neuroscientist, and that was an amazing presentation. Tough act to follow. So I'm going to share a screen. I will mention before I share my screen that Kingston is a small city of about 25,000. We're on the Hudson River, and we're about 2 hours away from New York City. And I came to this conversation because unfortunately my family was lead poisoned by negligent contractors who failed to follow EPA RP lead safe rules. And because of this, I became very educated about lead, hence also researched playground surfaces and realized if you're not working with a non-toxic surface, these rubber surfaces contain a lot of heavy metals. So when my husband texted me in July and said, "You're not going to believe this, our son's playground has a new pour in place rubber surface," I decided to make a big stink. And I can tell you more about my particular advocacy, but I do have a presentation prepared, and I'm going to share my screen. I'm a Mac user, not a PC user, so I hope this shows up the way it does for me. I had some tech difficulties. Let's give this a shot. And I'm going to change. Hold on. Can everybody see this? I no longer see faces. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to change my presentation just so slightly because I'm sure there's some overlap here. But here you see a few of the playgrounds in Kingston. There are many. We have 12 middle school, elementary school, and preschool playgrounds, and a variety of city playgrounds. And our superintendent of schools and board of education have wanted to resurface them all. And mind you, all of these playgrounds previously featured non-toxic wood mulch. The playgrounds you see here are in various stages of completeness. And I'm going to jump ahead to the first page of my presentation because I'm very visual. And when I think of river playgrounds, I think of a dump. I think of the tires. And this is essentially what your child is playing on. I see a few scientists in the group, and it looks like Kathy covered some of the components. But obviously the most nefarious component of a pour in place playground is the SVR. Manufacturers like to greenwash They'll tell you this is a recycled product, it's good for the environment, it's good for the ecosystem, but that stands for styrene butadiene. And it is full of toxic chemicals. And the top layer of the EPDM is also a synthetic rubber. It's not completely innocuous, but eventually that surface will wear down, revealing the crumb rubber, which is what we're most concerned with. I geeked out over the weekend and I visited the EPA's website where they have 290 identified chemicals in crumb rubber. So these are all the fabulous molecular structures. That's a lot of chemicals. Kathy touched upon why these chemicals are not good for our children. They have VOCs, PFAS, endocrine disruptors, heavy metals, you name it. And some of you may be familiar, others not, with Yale's study where they identified 306 chemicals, 197 of which were computationally predicted to be carcinogenic. So not something that I want in my playgrounds. And personally, I don't need to do testing to determine this couldn't possibly be good for anyone, let alone children. So with that in mind, kids are not little adults, they're more susceptible. One of my favorite quotes came from a former EPA toxicologist. I'm going to zoom in. And she said, "This was a serious no-brainer. You take something with all kinds of hazardous materials and make it something kids play on. It seems like a dumb idea." Couldn't agree more. Here is the first playground at my son's elementary school. He's a first grader. There were chemicals left on the field for months, as you can see over in the corner. And unfortunately, the periphery was not installed well because the crumb rubber has been leaching out from the sides from day one. And I'll show you pictures of some of those crumb later. Let's see. And where this becomes problematic is as the playground surface degrades. They look colorful and cushy and spongy and fun to use at the onset, but they do age. Many of these manufacturers claim these playgrounds will last 10 years or more. That's going to depend on how much traffic the playground receives, and they also harden over time. And areas that receive the most traction, for instance, where kids swing their legs under the swing sets or down slides or below ladders, are going to have even more of that crumb rubber show through. And it's not just pieces of crumb, it's also the dust. And what you see in this visual here, and also especially over here outlined in pink, these are the pieces and chunks and shreds of crumb that have littered the playgrounds in Kingston since the day they were installed. We don't even have to wait for the playgrounds to degrade to expose our kids to these toxins. I find it really terrifying. The precautionary principle. This brings to mind a bevy of products some of us have used, others have not, that we all know now are completely detrimental to our health and should not be on the market or are no longer on the market. And for those of you who didn't know much about artificial turf before you visited today, this is my favorite ad for the original AstroTurf, manufactured by our friends at Monsanto. I purposely chose the visuals in this piece to show that kids are tactile. They put their hands on the surface. We might have some nose pickers in the bunch, nail biters. Kids like to eat and drink. So they're getting a lot of exposure. And one of the most worrisome studies I came across is from 2019. And due to the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, we're now seeing that our kids have 10 times the likelihood of getting cancer. So while there are knowledge gaps with a lot of these chemicals, there are enough recent studies that prove, at least from my estimation, that these playgrounds simply are not safe for children. We've all heard about the 6-PPD by this point, the 6-PPD cube. I put some little tires here, hope you like that. And studies have been performed on mice and of course on aquatic life, but I also came across this January 2024 study that links exposure from e-waste, 6-PPD dust from e-waste in kindergartners. And whereas the flu and BMI and increased diarrhea might be as troublesome as death of a species, it still shows that these are not components that we want in the playground when safe alternatives exist. Again, this was another study from 2022 I thought was interesting because it tracked just how much accidental ingestion occurs at playgrounds, and it broke it down by age. And I was very surprised to learn that 6 to 11-year-olds? Yes, 6 to 11-year-olds and accidentally ingested just as much as the youngest children. I thought that was surprising. And you'll also notice that I chose visuals with lots of bare feet, because the powers that be in Kingston like to claim that kids don't go barefoot, that the majority of the time they'll have their shoes on. This to not be true. This playground in particular is also at George Washington, my son's school, and it's especially troublesome because it was, the surface was poured right up to the edges of doorways and windows. And this is where the youngest babies go to school for ages 2 to 5. And there are over 24 windows here. We do not have air conditioning in this building. So all of those beautiful, wonderful, stinky VOCs are going to be wafting through the windows. And this is going to get a lot of extra traction because parents, children, and teachers walk over this playground to get to other schoolrooms daily. And this is where my preschooler will be going to school next year. I also caught the vendor in action, and you'll notice the t-shirt here, safety surface, play safe surfacing. We all know that's a complete misnomer and not true whatsoever. I was also curious, I've seen a lot of literature on how many tires are used in artificial turf, but I hadn't come across many that specified how many tires are incorporated into each playground, and they number in the thousands. So the playgrounds here run from 1,600 tires to a total of 3,366 tires. And for all the scientists in the group, you can appreciate why, since this is not a homogeneous product, why accurate and widespread testing is essential when testing for neurotoxins like lead, because if you are testing just a small component of one playground, you cannot then say that, oh, because we found a few tire shreds that tested low for lead, this must mean that this playground isn't a lead hazard, and none of these other playgrounds are going to contain lead either. That just makes no sense. Kingston also has a very, very big problem with lead. I recommend you all Google, or we can send it later. There was a great writer's expose drafted in 2017 where you can plug in your zip code and see just how high the elevated blood lead levels are in your area. The average at the time was 2.5%. Flint, at the height of its crisis, 5%. As you can see in the pink, Kingston had an average elevated lead level of 24.46%. And there is no safe level of lead. And there's absolutely no reason why any heavy metal or any other toxin should be used in playgrounds when safe alternatives exist. And I jumped in late, so I'm not sure if it was covered, but it was announced just a couple of weeks ago that the EPA reduced its threshold in soil from 400 to 200. But I bring up soil because the VIPs in Kingston keep on using the 400 parts per million threshold in soil as a baseline for standards in playgrounds. And it's important to note that there are no safety standards for playgrounds. And if we are to make comparisons, I personally think we should use interior floor surfaces, 10 parts per million, or at minimum, the value allowed in toys, which is 100 parts per million. Can't forget that tires are microplastics and they end up in the ocean. This is a picture I took yesterday, one of the playgrounds in Kingston. If you see the little white area over here, that is the Hudson River. And that runoff is going to end up in the river and our oceans. Even if you don't care about toxins, these are heat nightmares. So say it's 75 outside, the ambient air temperature, that pit playground could be as hot as 180 degrees. So it's infinitely hotter than grass or concrete. And again, the medical director for Kingston City School District, our superintendent, and a consultant that were hired say, you know, kids, they're not taking their shoes off most of the time. Well, no child should become a statistic, and it's going to happen. And what we need to remember is that it's not only school-age children who use these playgrounds, they are visited after hours by babies and toddlers. I thought this was interesting. This has been a hot topic on Twitter, which I recently joined. I thought it was a dead platform. I was wrong. It's been a lot of fun. The manufacturers love to claim that this is a safety surface, that it causes fewer injuries, that it's cushy, and it's going to protect children from falls. And the opposite is true. This over here in red was the study I located. It's rather old, but it's still applicable, from 2008 from the University of Queensland in Australia. And as you can see here, it says, it details the technical reasons why the impact forces associated with falls onto rubber-based products can be 10 times greater than those associated with organic products. It also causes more bone and leg breaks. It's detrimental to concussions. Here's an interesting, let me see if I can zoom in. This was from a teacher whose husband was a paramedic. And she says, my husband, who is a paramedic of 25 years, said a fall on concrete gives a cleaner break than on rubber matting. The GMAX scores for playgrounds also are not equivalent to those for the NFL. So some of you may recognize Diane Mulkey's Twitter handle up here. And she commented that, she said, are you kidding me? Even the NFL wouldn't accept a score of that denomination, and they wear helmets. So people seem to care a lot more about sports than they do about children, and children don't have a voice. They need someone to speak for them. One of my biggest requests is, even if I cannot convince Kingston to stop installing these playgrounds, I want signage. On rare occasion, you'll see signage at artificial turf fields, and on even rare occasions, you'll see a little disclaimer like you see in the yellow down here about heat. Well, Mount Sinai is just one of our group of friends who have further recommendations, and I would love to see what teachers have to say when we tell them, shower those kids immediately after recess, brush their hair, vacuum any crumbs that come into the classroom, wash your hands, always wear shoes. Kids are going to be kids. And my son at moment isn't even allowed to wash his hands, and he goes straight from recess into the cafeteria to eat his lunch. He tells me they give him hand sanitizer, but hand sanitizer is not going to eradicate toxins. Finally, I see Lindsay Pollard in the audience. Hi, Lindsay. Lindsay's been wonderful. She's been one of the experts I've consulted with. So this is a borrowed chart from Toxic Use Reduction Institute's updated playground report from December of 2023. And I bring this up because it's really easy to point fingers at people and say, shame on you, but what we really need are solutions. And I've been told that the best solution is engineered wood fiber. You can see this is a beautiful engineered wood fiber playground over here. It's ADA compliant. And these playgrounds are infinitely cheaper. According to Turi, pit playgrounds cost as much as roughly $98,000. A significant increase from the last time they produced a report. So there's not even a financial reason to choose toxic playgrounds over natural alternatives. And I will leave you with this visual. Skip the fake stuff and go for the natural stuff. And that's that.
Thank you so much, Lee. Your story and the information on these PIP surfaces is so critical. I just visited my newly installed in late September PIP surface, which is about 125 yards from a pristine trout stream, which the 6 QPPD does impact those trout too. But like you were saying, kids take off their shoes. I found a little bitty socks sitting there. One of the other things that I remember my community saying, the community leaders, was that there's a polyurethane coating that goes over that PIP surface that's going to lock away the toxins from the people who play on it. And already around the playground, it has been worn off and worn away. And there was PIP particles about 30 feet away from the field, and another 50 feet, there were big hunks of this surface. So yeah, it's rough. So one of the things that Kathleen and Lee and I are doing right now is we're in the middle of forming a sign-on letter that you can take to your communities, as well as other resources that you can take to them. I've developed Move Past Plastic has developed an infographic, but we have all kinds of infographics, and we'll have letters, we'll have these videos, so that you can go to your communities and do a couple of things. One, tell them if they already have poured in place or artificial turf fields or of the like, to not reinstall, and to put up these warning signs that we're compiling of what we want on there, and also to do maintenance, because if you don't do this maintenance, as in Kathleen's slides, you can see all kinds of things put on it, and it causes more contaminants and bacteria and all kinds of issues. So look for that, and to go to your communities. And if they haven't installed, then you really have a leg up, and you can give them this information so that you shut it down from the beginning. In my community, unfortunately, I found out about them installing an artificial turf field right when they had dug up the football field. And then right before they were going to pull the trigger on the poured in place, they hadn't purchased it yet, but they were due to purchase it. Like, I had contacted them on a Monday when I found out about it, and they were due to purchase it Friday. So the wheels were already rolling. So it's really difficult to get your Parks and Rec director, your mayor, and your school superintendent to listen to you if things are underway. So, but it's still important that you share the information that we're going to be packaging up and having available to you. So let's open it up for questions here. And if you can, you are welcome to just raise your hand, and I'll call on you and come off mic. That would be fine.
I can make another comment if there are no questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
Kathleen can speak on probably. Kathleen, I know a lot was mentioned with the acute injuries, but as we know and was mentioned, there are a lot of chronic injuries, and we kind of talked about some of the pathways, but could you just please quickly define for everyone the three predominant pathways of both chronic and acute exposure from these surfaces?
So I assume you're talking about exposures to the constituents in both the plastics and the tire crumb. So I put in the chat, as the stuff breaks down, all the toxic materials in it become more available. And so you can, you saw the pictures of it getting on the skin. So dermal is one, your skin usually protects you somewhat, but if it gets scraped up, it can't protect you very well. But as this stuff breaks down, you inhale it. So every child that steps on one of these playgrounds or fields is basically surrounded by a cloud of micro and nano particulates that contain these toxins. So, and then of course there's ingestion. Now that's more that, most adults, although if you watch athletes, they have their mouth guards, they have, so they actually get it into their mouths too. And you'll also, if you've ever been a parent of a child or played on these fields themselves, the tire crumb will get into your eyes, into your ears. I mean, it gets everywhere. So, and like I put in the chat, it's the industry, a lot of industries, it's not just this industry that promulgate toxin containing materials, like to hide behind the word inert. So they like to say the plastics are inert, or the tire crumb is inert, and all the toxic stuff that's in there, don't pay attention to those toxins behind the curtain. They're not going to get you. Just like, Wizard of Oz, don't pay attention. But as you break this stuff down, it becomes more and more available to, in all of these routes of exposure. Just like coffee, if you grind up your coffee, you get a good cup of coffee. If you try to make coffee out of coffee beans, not so much, although, over time you get a little, so I guess that's what you,
Yes, yes. So they've identified 5 dermal exposures, 4 respiratory, and then 3
and oral and ingestion.
digestive. Yep, yep. And so some of these things too, that they can cause headaches, nausea, dermatitis, allergies, lung issues, as well as, exacerbating, body mass index, causing problems with liver, central nervous system, and reproductive system, and cancers down the line. So go ahead with your comment, Lee.
Oh, you must have been reading my mind. I was just thinking that the first time I visited one of the other playgrounds that belongs to our district, I was approached by some after-school YMCA directors who said, off the record, we just want to let you know a lot of our kids have had increased asthma, they've had headaches, they've had respiratory issues. And this was in October. So these playgrounds stink. You can smell it even in the winter. It's an issue. But the point I wanted to make was, I'm not sure if there are any viewers from New York State, and you might have covered this, Kathleen, I'm not sure, but there is a bill in New York State that was signed in 2022 by our governor banning artificial carpet. That is the plastic grass component of artificial turf. And that means that when these artificial turfs that get installed now, or had already been installed, wear out and have to be tossed in 8 to 10 years or so, by law, those municipalities aren't going to be allowed to put a new turf because all of the turf contains PFAS. But I've been very surprised at how few groups in New York know about this. I was recently approached by the East River, I think it's called East River Action Coalition, and they are trying to prevent the East River from being loaded with artificial turf. They're taking down the trees and they're putting in this synthetic toxic stuff. So please, please, please tell anyone that you know in New York State that we're the first United States to enact this law. California vetoed its law, and it's progress. So New Yorkers, hooray.
Yeah, yeah.
And we also we're trying to prevent field turf, another round of field turf in Kingston. So I managed to convince our Board of Education to put a temporary halt to the 3 remaining playgrounds. Our superintendent, unfortunately, did not wait for any kind of toxicology results, and he went ahead and poured a couple of the new playgrounds anyways. But we have the potential to save our middle school playgrounds and to hopefully prevent this turf from being put down at Dietz Stadium. So I also want to speak. I see there's someone in the audience who says they're approaching their school board. One person can make a difference. Don't be afraid to speak out. You just have to be vocal and committed. Contact other parents. One of the things that worked for me was an email campaign, and I drafted a form fill that let people customize what they wanted to say, and we sent this onslaught to our superintendent. He wasn't very happy with the form fill, but it worked. And whereas previously they didn't even want to admit there was a problem with the playgrounds, after the parents emailed en masse, the superintendent finally sent an email out to the entire district saying, oh, these might be dangerous, we're investigating them. Yeah. It's pretty clear they didn't do accurate testing, but that's another story. So I'm not done fighting yet.
So I see we have hit 7. Lori, we're going to get to you in 1 second, but for those who have to leave, I want to thank you so much for coming. This is so important. It's where petrochemicals, fossil fuels, PFAS, plastics all meet in one, and we make the most toxic thing out there next to maybe polyvinyl chloride piping, PVC piping, and we say, hey, kids, play on it. So for those of you who want to help with this campaign to combat synthetic playing surfaces in your own communities, please make sure you sign on to movepastplastic.com, and we will include you, or and anyone who wants to work on this campaign and have access to the things that we're making to make it easier for just a regular person to go to, like I said, their superintendent, their Parks and Rec director, and their municipal leaders, to ask them to take action on this playing surfaces they have installed and or not to install. Just reach out to me, and I'll put, didn't really advertise that in the chat. So it's movepastplastic.com. And you can email me at movepastplastic@gmail. Pamela. So Lori, go ahead and ask your question.
Pamela, thank you so much. You always put on just amazing conversations, and the two presenters have just been fabulous. I live in the South, in North Carolina, and I just shudder to think of what the heat of the summer does to the playing surfaces. My town, Pinehurst, has just installed one field and are planning to put in 2 more, I believe. So I'm really eager to hear what kinds of tactics we can use. However, this is a red area, and anything that we greenies talk about, we are always accused of being Debbie Downers, of talking about all the bad stuff. And most particularly, I think that the retort from my neighbors here regarding this would be, well, what do you expect us to do with the tires? We were coming up with something to do with the tires, to recycle tires. Isn't that what you wanted? So I'm just curious what that response would be.
Well, if I could jump in there, I mean, that's my least favorite. It's like, so you are going to bring the toxic hazardous waste facility to your children's playfield? I mean, why is that even a thing? I mean, just using a hot toxic material on a children's playground just should be a non-starter. Do something else with tires. It's like, it shouldn't be an either or. It's like, anyway. Yeah, I mean, children deserve better.
Yeah, it's so toxic that they can't take it and bring it to an incinerator to burn. And most landfills will not take it because it's so toxic, and the leachate from it is toxic. And yet we're going to say, take our most vulnerable population and say, yes, let's play on it. So Lori, I would say, number one, it's fiscally irresponsible because it costs more currently, and you can pretty much expect a lawsuit because a lot more health studies are coming out about its toxicity, and that could be a liability that your municipality may not be interested in. When they have children having those acute injuries and then, coming up long-term injuries, and they put it in knowing that there was a problem that could come back to bite them in the butt, I'm thinking. And then also, yes, we would like to be able to recycle things, but to recycle one of the most toxic things we make as a place to play on is just a non-starter.
And if you don't mind, if I can jump in, one of the travesties of this, and again, kids, because kids don't have a voice. There are many places, including our locality, Montgomery County, Maryland, that have banned the use of tire waste on the synthetic turf fields. So we're still fighting the synthetic turf fields themselves, but at least they banned the use of the tire waste on new ones going forward. However, as far as I know, there's nowhere in the US that has actually banned this stuff that they've already admitted is bad enough that they're not going to use it on these plastic carpets, have banned it for children's playgrounds. And so we all need to be their voice. I mean, part of the reason I've been working on this for so long, I thought it was like such a no-brainer that, I would just let people know, about it, and it would go away. It would be a fad. And I've been working on this for more than 15 years. And it's because the industry is polluting for profit on the back of people who, children who don't have a voice. So you need to be their voice. Montgomery, Maryland, which isn't always progressive in this stuff, but we do have legislators now who are putting forward legislation to ban any surfacing. So they're actually going after the constituents, any surfacing that has polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, lead, or PFAS in them at any detectable level. We're not sure how that's going to do this year. We don't have great hopes, but that's what we all need to be doing. We really need to be pushing back at our localities. So by pushing back, that's how we got 10 years ago, almost now, 2015, we got the tire crumb banned from the synthetic turf fields. The playgrounds weren't a big thing back then. They weren't using the tire rubber much on the playgrounds yet. And so otherwise we would have pushed harder on that, of course. So now we're really trying to get, like Tamala Lee has said, and, Tamala, the children should not be exposed to this stuff at all. I mean, even just the heat. I mean, think about it. Even if it was purely inert, I mean, why do you want a child exposed to 150, 160, 170 degree surfacing? It's not just the horrific burns that they can get, but, it's heat stroke. And it makes no sense. But so approach your legislators, your Board of Education, if they're doing it at schools, your local county councils, and your state legislators, and just hammer away at them. Say, we need to stop this. And we can make, the information in these presentations available. There's tons of information out there now. The Toxics Use Reduction Institute has some wonderful information. There's other organizations now. Beyond Plastics is developing a great, suite of information, and is a great resource to talk with people. But you have to actually get out there and talk with your legislators. We have to get this stuff legislated out of our environment, and off of children's playfields in particular. I mean, it's just an obscenity. So, sorry, off my soapbox.
Thank you, Kathleen. That's really helpful. And
Well, any final words from you, Lee, before we wrap up this evening?
I'd just like to point out, you can reach me at nontoxickingston@gmail.com. I'm happy to share expert testimonials or my knowledge. That would give me a lot of pleasure to help other communities, for sure. You can also find me at CAST Everywhere, CAST Everywhere on Twitter, where I occasionally post about both turf and playgrounds.
Would you mind putting that information in the chat? Because I'm
Sure.
going to cap chat, and so your presentations will be made available. The MPP toolkit with all of this will be in there, with the recording and the chat. And stay tuned for our next gathering, where we're all going to be working on this as a team, and helping our communities protect our youth, and bring back the grass, and bring back our engineered wood fiber to our fields. So,
one last thing, that New York ban on artificial carpet does not take effect until the end of 2024.
Right.
I see some comments in here, so I thought I'd announce it, since people might not see mine. So sorry for interrupting.
This is another thing that's happening, is as some of this legislation goes into effect, and we saw it happen here, all of a sudden there's like this huge push to get, facts on the ground, to get this stuff in before the legislation, goes into effect. It's just horrific. I mean, because then of course they're not going to pull it out right away. And in the meantime, it's polluting, and poisoning and
So
fry.
Diane commented about the wood chips. The wood chips, the engineered wood chips are ADA compliant. So there's a way that you do the cross slope and the slope to get your proper drainage, and then you do some packing, and they are wheelchair compliant.
Right. If
Well,
they're
good
installed
evening.
correctly, just like everything else, and so that's the
Just like
key.
everything else. Yep.
Yeah.
And so thank you everyone for coming, and a huge thank you to Kathleen and to Lee. Amazing presentations, just off the charts. And I'm so grateful that I folded us in all together, and I look forward to working with you guys on this issue. And let's get these things out of across the whole US.
And if I could just say one more thing, Rebecca's Kreshkoff is here. Beyond Plastics as a speakers bureau. So if you actually want people to come and talk to you about plastics in general, and synthetic turf is a subset of that. But it's a great and I see Rebecca here. I don't know if you have time, maybe she could say something.
Yeah, I would be happy to come talk, and thank you, Kathy, for coming to my presentation last week. And I really want to incorporate material on synthetic turf into my presentation, because it's so devastating. It's god awful.
Yep.
So thank you for that.
Take care, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.